Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're tackling one of the most fascinating and, frankly, most misunderstood challenges in modern urban design. We hear a lot of talk about how to make our cities more livable as the climate changes, and there's one specific solution that always seems to steal the spotlight. But as we're about to see, the reality is just a lot more complicated than those glossy architectural renderings make it seem. Okay, let's dive into this. We know how to cool our cities. The problem is keeping those solutions alive. Now, this is the core paradox we're unpacking today. Think about it. We actually possess the technology, the ecological know-how, the whole shebang to bring the temperature of our concrete jungles down. The science is completely sound. But the breakdown isn't happening in the laboratory or the design studio. It's happening in the messy, day-to-day reality of the real world. So, to really get a grip on this, let's first take a hard look at the urban heat problem itself. Cities are heating up fast. To understand why finding a solution matters so much, we have to grasp the sheer scale of what we're up against. Across the United States and Europe, summer temperatures are absolutely soaring, and the impacts are visceral, they're immediate. Record-breaking heat waves are pushing our urban infrastructure to the brink. It strains local power grids to the breaking point. It forces cities to open emergency cooling shelters just to keep vulnerable folks safe. And perhaps most alarmingly, it can make the top floors of some apartment buildings literally unlivable. We aren't just talking about a mild discomfort here, right? We're talking about a desperate search for innovative cooling methods to keep urban living actually viable. Which brings us to the supposed hero of our story, the green roof. Let's break down the anatomy of these biological oases. When you look up at a city skyline, you're probably used to seeing these vast, barren expanses of traditional asphalt, metal, or tile. But I want you to imagine looking beyond that. Imagine transforming those heat-absorbing dead zones into complex, living ecosystems, elevated hundreds of feet in the air. Sounds amazing, right? But how exactly does a standard rooftop become a biological oasis? Well, let's build it from the bottom up. Step 1 is a heavy-duty insulation layer to protect the building's internal temperature. Step 2 is crucial, a specialized waterproofing membrane, because, the last thing anyone wants is a forest leaking into their corporate boardroom. Step 3 is a drainage system to manage water flow. And finally, Step 4, the plants themselves. Depending on the design, these living roofs can support everything from little low-growing sedums to fully mature shrubs and trees. And honestly, humanity has been experimenting with this for quite a while. Just think of the rooftop terrace gardens at Rockefeller Center in New York City. They've been holding trees, grass, and shrubs since the 1930s. It offers this incredible park-like respite high above the traffic. Or take the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. Its roof is fully covered by 2.5 acres of native coastal flowers and succulents. These aren't just decorative landscaping projects. They are massive, breathtaking engineering marvels. But their real superpower? That lies in the science of cooling. Plants actively cool the surrounding air through a brilliant process called evapotranspiration. It's a big word, but essentially, plants absorb the sunlight that would normally just bake the building below, and instead they release water vapor back into the atmosphere. It's basically nature's very own air conditioning system, performing a literal magic trick to combat the urban heat island effect. And those superpowers don't stop at just cooling the air. Green roofs pull triple duty. Because of their dense, layered structure, they act as incredible building insulation, which drastically reduces the energy needed for indoor heating and cooling. They also act like giant sponges. They capture rainfall to prevent it from overwhelming storm drains, meaning they heavily reduce flood risks. And beautifully, they improve local biodiversity. They provide crucial habitats for birds, butterflies, and insects, right smack in the middle of our concrete jungles. So with all those benefits, it's pretty obvious why cities absolutely love them. They're a massive tool for building climate resilience. Local governments and even major organizations like the European Commission and the EPA have been heavily promoting green roofs. But how do you actually convince private developers to build these complicated things? Well, you do it with heavy financial incentives. Cities are basically throwing parks at developers to get these roofs built. We're talking massive tax credits, stormwater fee reductions, sped-up building permits. To put that into perspective, the city of Philadelphia offers a tax credit that can cover up to 50% of a green roof's entire construction cost. They are pulling out all the stops to get these living roofs off the ground. But, and this is a big but, we have to look at the shocking survival rate, because the real world isn't quite as neat as the planning stage. We've seen the incredible benefits, the complex engineering, the massive upfront government money. But here is where the story shifts from optimistic construction to a much harsher reality. Researchers recently set out to find what actually happens 5, 10, or 20 years down the road. Out of 46 roofs studied in the southeastern United States, get this, only 25 were still functioning as intended. 9 had been completely abandoned, just left to die with total vegetation loss, and 12 roofs had been ripped out completely. Think about that. Nearly half of these expensive, highly incentivized roofs had utterly failed. So why? Why are these expensive ecosystems dying off so quickly? The researchers looked for a common thread, and the ultimate predictor of failure wasn't whether the building had some fancy LEED certification. It didn't matter if it was owned by a wealthy private corporation or a nonprofit. The ultimate predictor of failure was tied to changing building ownership. Every single time a building changed hands, vital knowledge about that living roof was lost. New owners stepped in with different budgets, different priorities, and frankly, zero desire to spend the time or money required to maintain someone else's garden. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, fixing the maintenance gap and addressing these hidden vulnerabilities. This failure rate reveals a fatal flaw in how we think about urban greening. We focus so entirely on the design and the initial installation that we've completely ignored the hidden vulnerability causing these roofs to disappear. And that vulnerability, it almost always comes down to money. Specifically, the ongoing cost. Maintaining a green roof can cost up to $3 per square foot per year. For a sprawling commercial roof, that translates to a massive, unexpected annual bill that financially shocks new building owners who just weren't prepared for it. And that money goes toward a grueling, pretty unglamorous reality. A green roof is not a set-it-and-forget-it asset. It requires hand weeding, it requires watering, fertilizing, constantly replacing dead plants. The irrigation systems need regular repairs. And critically, those complex drainage layers we talked about earlier, they need constant inspection. Because if you neglect drainage on a green roof, you risk disastrous water leaks that will severely damage the entire building below. So what we have here is a massive imbalance in our broader policy focus. On one hand, we've got these flashy construction incentives, the tax credits, the fast permits that get the roof built in the first place. But on the other hand, we have the daunting long-term realities, the weeding, the watering, the leak inspections, and the inevitable changing of building ownership. Right now, our policies heavily fund the initial build, but they completely ignore the long term. Basically, we incentivize the birth of these ecosystems, but we offer zero support for their actual survival. The source material for today's explainer offers an absolutely brilliant analogy that hits the nail on the head. Imagine planting thousands of street trees, then never watering them again. We would all agree that's a terrible investment, right? Yet, that is exactly what we are doing with green roofs. People just assume they'll indefinitely work after installation without stopping to consider the very real, ongoing labor involved in keeping biological infrastructure alive. Which leaves us with this final thought. If climate adaptation isn't just about building new infrastructure, but about ensuring it can thrive for decades to come, are we truly adapting to climate change, or are we just building temporary illusions? The data shows that we absolutely know how to build a cooler future. The real question is whether we are willing to put in the constant, quiet work of stewardship required to maintain it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.